Hi. Hey everyone. Nice to see you. We're here today and we want to talk about clue 1 of our mystery shawl Knitalong Grianchloch. So if you're already part of the Knitalong, then welcome in. We're going to talk all about it, some of the things that have come up in discussions, some of the things that Magali, who has been knitting through the first clue, has kind of encountered and thoughts she's been having along the way. We will, before we take the clue out and have the knitting, we promise we'll have a trigger warning. We'll just say, we'll call you out for a spoiler alert. Outside of that, we'll just be talking about the yarns and the gauge and things like that. As always, if you have questions, pop them up in the comments. We will, I've got them open here. So yes, I'll keep an eye out on it so that if any of you have questions that have been popping up that you haven't had a chance to answer, we can get to it. I'm going to cover a few topics that have come up in the forum so far. So the ones that have come up that I'm going to try and get to, the first one is the gauge and the fact that the gauge is quite tight before you block it. And so we'll talk about that. Next one is taking a look at when you're going between the main color and the contrast color for because the fact that you're changing colors in a wrong side row. So we'll take a look at that. And then the last one that I have some questions on is how you go about modifying the shape and making it a little bit wider and things like that. So I had a few ideas that I can talk through. I popped some up on the forums on KnitHub. So if you are taking part and you want to either see a refresh of this, it'll be on here, or if you've got a question that you think other knitters may also be able to help with, just pop into the actual Grianchloch section on KnitHub and you'll be able to find all the answers there. And if you haven't joined yet, then just go find the Grianchloch Mystery Shawl Knitalong and you can join now. You can join at any point because the pattern will give you all the videos and will include you in the KnitHub forum as well. So how'd you get on, Mags?
So can I take it out now, or do we? We'll talk about it first. We'll talk about it first.
Yes.
It was so interesting. It was my very first MKAL. It was the first time that I was knitting something with just blind eyes. So I found it very interesting. I found that I really had to keep close to the pattern and, no TV in the background or anything. I think it was a really nice way to bring knitting back into what it is and no multitasking.
Yeah, like a bit more focused.
Yes.
That
definitely.
makes sense.
Especially with kind of the start of the few rows and things like that. I just had to make sure that I was increasing where I was supposed to and decreasing where I was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it was nice because I knit so much and I'm sure that people in the comment will kind of relate to that. Sometimes you knit so much and you think about the result and you're kind of in that process of like just getting at it. And this was such a nice way to slow it down.
Yeah.
To be like, we're actually enjoying the process of knitting.
True.
And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So I have a question here, 2 questions. And the first one is, what Liz was saying, your humor looks gorgeous.
Oh, thank you, Liz. Thank you.
And Marcy above that said she hasn't started yet as she can't get gauge. So actually that is something I'm going to talk about because of course, we were using, is it 3 3/4 needles or is it 4?
No, it's 4. It's 4,
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's 4.
So it's knit a little more loosely, and before it's blocked, it's going to be tighter, right? I mean, that was your experience.
Like I had the exact same issues. Like when I knit, I'm always very careful not to stretch too much when I'm blocking, and then I was like, oh my god.
It's
like
the opposite.
Way off. Yeah, it was way off.
Yeah, it's the opposite with the shawl. With shawls, because you want to be able to, I can kind of lift one over here. This is not the shawl, obviously. With the shawl, you want it floppy. See that floppiness you get from a shawl? That happens because of blocking. I call it aggressive blocking, or in other words, stretching the living daylights out of it. Basically, pin it till you can't stop pinning. Wet pinning is even better, right? If you got a wet block it, pin it, take it out, give it a shake out, leave it sit for a day because it will spring back a knittle, and check the gauge then. So it's not blocking straight off the needles. It will stretch quite a bit. So hopefully that's the direction you were having, that the gauge was too tight. So Marcy, if that didn't answer your question, let me know. And if your gauge problems were pre-blocking, that might be the issue, because I did give the gauge and I said blocked in pattern, but what I didn't write in the gauge, because it wasn't the full pattern, I didn't say, because you had the same thing, is I didn't say aggressively block, or maybe
remember, be aggressive.
Yeah, and it's also known as lace blocking, is another one that is.
Yeah, because I was like, I blocked it and I was like, I could not possibly go higher in needle size. Like, it just felt wrong to go to 4.5 millimeters for a lace weight. So I remember, and I chatted to you about it and you were like, remember. That makes sense.
Yeah, and it does make a difference, because I think if you went up too far, you're going to end up, it'll be very hard to control the tension. I think you'll end up with very uneven stitches. And there's another question here from Audrey. She was asking how I weave the ends in with the short row wedges. So that kind of ties in a little bit to how the fact that I'm doing my short row wedges on, or introducing the new color on a wrong side row. I did have a good reason for that. First of all, you know, when you're, do you want to pull it out actually?
Oh yeah, okay.
Warning, we're pulling it out. So with this, we've got short row wedges, and I changed the colors on the wrong side row. So what that means is you'll have a row, particularly if you've got big high contrast like this, where you've got a line of the two colors showing. Now, I personally like the way that shows. If you do not like that, then my suggestion would be to the row before, start one row earlier, begin on the previous right side row to one row of the contrast, and then just continue on with the rest. The reason I did it, there was reason to my madness, as well as liking the way it looks, is the short row, the short part of the short rows are over here. So if you're starting and stopping, you don't have to break this main color yarn. So a part of that was me really hating starting and stopping extra yarn. So that was actually, that was the determining factor for me personally. If you don't care and you don't like the way these look, flip it around by just starting the color on the other side. But remember, it's a shawl. So, you know, you could have it hanging like this, but it can just as easily turn the other way. So just bear that in mind, that generally speaking, both sides are going to be visible, right? But I didn't really quite answer the question you were asking, which was in relation to weaving in ends. What I ended up doing was, I won't show you here, but you can look at on the website. I call it weaving in ends as I go. It's a bit like weaving in floats. You might have done that before.
So I would do it with crochet. So I started doing it with knitting, where I just knit over. I'm assuming you knit over the end as you go along. Yeah. Yeah,
just kind of, well, I lift one up and I lift one down in between.
Okay.
You know, so it's when you're weaving in a float, if you're holding the yarn in the right hand, when you go to knit the stitch, you lift the color, the tail over the yarn, you knit it, and then you unwrap it and knit it, and the next one you stay down, and the next one up. So you're basically, it's effectively weaving in as you go. Yeah. But like you did that with a crochet hook.
Yeah, for crochet work, not for knitting work.
Yeah.
But for knitting work, it feels a bit like, you know, when you do a tubular bind off and you have that kind of, you bring the yarn in front and in back and in front. Yeah. Except you knit all of the stitches for this one. Yeah. I like that as well. I'm always, I rarely weave the ends in straight away as I go. I'm not good enough of a person. I think I respect the people that do. I really respect the people that do.
Yeah, mine is mainly just because I don't like that first stitch being loose. So I end up doing it for a few stitches.
And then and
then I come back afterwards and weave them in afterwards. But I do it for a couple of stitches so that it kind of snugs it in. Sheila, she likes the way it looks where it's written, where you've got the ones in between. There's a close-up request here, so I'm going to let Mags go up to the camera.
Is that
there
close enough? Yeah, a bit more, and there we go. So I'm bringing it here. So this is the wrong side, and this is our right side.
I'm watching. Marcy said she's going to have to watch that bit again because her cat Ted stole her yarn. Sarah, you're finishing yoga. Good morning from Cincinnati. Marcia, your gauge is usually fine. You measured after wet blocking and you're getting 26 stitches for 4 inches. Give it a shot, stretching it a lot more to see if it will, you know, if you can get a little bit more stretch out of it. If you're a very tight knitter, you know, you may still need to go up a needle size, but it is going to have, you know, you do want a good bit of stretch with it, because if it doesn't grow much more than that, even with aggressive blocking, you will get quite a narrow shawl, so because it's on the narrower side anyway. So I think you could end up with it a little bit narrow. Monica, you're using one contrast color and you're using a technique where you carry it up the side. Ah, very good. You probably don't need to go through each wedge, I'd say, carrying it up. But yeah, for the one, just for that, for the just small sections and then the garter going up, it should be fine. Anyone who's using a single color, when I'm saying C1 or C2, you just always use the contrast color. So like, you know, you've got one wedge like this, and then the other wedge uses the second color if you've got two contrast colors, and then the other one will go back. But if you've just got one, just each one will use the same one. It's still going to work. It's just going to be, it'll have a slightly different effect. Or if you've got even three, you could experiment and put each one in a different color. If you had tiny bits of scrap yarn and you wanted to pull bits in, you know, you could actually kind of have fun with it. I'm going to pull some of these up here. Do you remember the name? It's a test. Do you remember the name of this color? you get to look.
No, okay, I was so far off. It was
It's Queen of Pop.
Queen of Pop, yeah.
This one here, this is a new one. That the reason I pulled it out is we just got it into the shop, and it's Queen of Pop, and you can see it's actually got a lot of really nice different colors going on. So this is 50 grams of mohair, and because the yardage is so good, you only need one of these. But when you've got something where there's a lot of different color differences going on, each section is effectively going to be like a different color, right? Because it's going to, and because there's so many different ones going on, you can see you've got different options for the color as well going in with it here. So this one here, it's a mohair and silk blend. It's 70% mohair and 30% silk for this. And the Life on the Long Grass one is same blend of the two. It's also 70% mohair, 30% silk. And this is the pressed flower one, which is a more subtle color. It's kind of little grays, pinks, purples. One of our favorite combos of that is this. If you want a more subtle combo, then having it with the green works really nicely too. But this is it's a nice soft color, the pressed flower color here. Shannon, how do I join in a new yarn? Yours is coming undone. So that's the one where my suggestion for that is using weaving. If you look up on the website, I think Laura might be able to pop in the link to the tutorial. It's called Weaving It Ends As You Go. So what you will do is it's a bit like when you're doing floats. When you go, you knit the first stitch with the new color, then the tail, lift it over, knit the next one, bring it down, then knit the next one. So you're kind of lifting it up and down over a few stitches, then you can drop the tail down, and that's enough to secure the start to the new one. Because I know with those small stitches and with the mohair, it's really slippy and it can kind of tend to pull out a bit.
And we don't want to force on it as well. We don't want to tighten it too much because it's very fine yarn. Yeah.
Actually, before we started, we were talking about your experiences of knitting with mohair. So I'm gonna let you repeat what you were talking about.
No, I just really enjoyed it because the needles are so much bigger than the actual weight, but I find that I just had to go very gently and maybe a bit slower than I usually knit. But again, kind of bringing it back to the mindfulness of it. It's just I felt that I had to be a lot more gentle.
Yeah.
And just very careful, like let some time for the yarn to kind of really take its place on each stitch. And again, just really bringing it back to the act of knitting. Actually, really liked it.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, and especially because we're doing short rows, and I know that for myself, I rarely get my short rows right from the first time, and then unraveling lace might be a bit tricky as well.
Yeah, mohair is always great.
Yeah, so you just want to be very slow, very gentle. But just find the enjoyment in it, which I very much did.
So I'm just looking again. Shannon was saying her keep coming undone. I'd suggest just going further. If it keeps coming undone, go a little bit further with that weaving in as you're knitting with it, because that will help hold it in. For me, with the German short rows, I did find, because the mohair is fuzzier, that when you turn, it's not always obvious where the double stitch is, because with the fine yarn, you'll always see it. So I did find myself using the marker quite frequently. So when I did the turn, I'd put a marker on the work, and you know, a removable marker, so that even if I didn't spot where the short row was or the double stitch was, I'd be able to see the marker, because it does, the stitches, they tend to blend together with the mohair.
They really do.
Yeah, and
I think that's a good idea, because I didn't mind counting a lot, because there's not that many stitches right now in my needles. But I expect that when you have a lot more stitches, you're much further away into the shawl, you probably don't want to have to be counting every single time. So maybe I think I might use the stitch markers then.
I'm going to kind of go back to the start as well, because we kind of jumped in almost at the second part of it. But just to the beginning, I used a twisted German cast-on, Old Norwegian. It's only a few stitches. So if you don't really like that, you can go do the long tail, works fine. Because the reason it's in there is it's just got a little bit more stretch, but the stitches are so few that you can really use your, you know, your preferred method. The biased shape is created by increasing on one side and decreasing on the other side. And the increases happen right and wrong side row over here. So every row, there's one extra stitch out on the right side, but it's only on the right side that you're decreasing. So basically, right side row, there is a bias, but there's no change in stitches. And then the wrong side row, you have one increase. So what that means is you're growing sideways, but you're not growing an awful lot in width. And it creates this really nice kind of, just biased shape, basically. It's neat that your stitches are going this way rather than this way. What it does do, though, is that the shawl doesn't grow widthwise very fast. It kind of, because you're only increasing one stitch every 2 rows, it tends to not widen up too much. And that's why I added those short rows in. So if we hold it up here, you see that the short rows are on this side at the start of it, because that's where all of the increases are, which means that there's no decreases in those rows. So the width increases really fast, or a lot faster, on the short row section. So that's why I was saying, is that if you want a wider shawl further on, if you're like, I really like much wider shawls, my suggestion would be adding in another short row wedge and garter section, because that's the fastest way of increasing those stitches. And you can see kind of changes the curve. See, it curves out a little here, because the rest of it is a straight line, but that's a bit of a curve. And then if you do that, the 2 things you want to watch out for is, 1, make sure you've got extra of the main color yarn, because the way the shawl's written, you pretty much use all of the main colors. So if you're intending on increasing the width, then you are going to want a good bit more yarn. And the second one is, try to do changes in multiples of 10 stitches, because the next stitch count is going to be in multiples of 10. So it's really easy to add extra repeats, because we were just talking about that today when we're moving on to the next section, because we're only going to do a mini shawl. So we're going to be decreasing in multiples of 10, but you are more likely to go in the other direction. If you're going to, I think you're more likely to want wider shawls. So then I'm going to throw that out to all of you as well. Or if you're going to make modifications, or, you know, what would you like to do, or what are you kind of worried about if you do modify going forward? So if you were actually making this for yourself, do you think you'd make it as is, or would you be likely to make it wider? How do you wear it, really, I suppose, is the question.
I like a really big scarf. I really like a big shawl. I like to feel like my head is in a nest of wool.
But big as in really long, or really wide, or both?
Both. I'm not gonna lie, I like both. I like really big scarves. And I think with a shawl like this, I would like to show it off as well, because I find that the yarn is very, the yarn and the pattern are very special. So I think I would probably go all in, maybe get an extra ball, an extra skein of yarn, and just go full. But I think that's something we've talked about before, is like, up until recently, I just wasn't feeling comfortable to modify patterns, and it's really ever since we started doing these that I'm like, oh, I'm just getting the confidence to actually modify the pattern. And I find that I'm getting a better understanding on how knitting really works, and how increases and decreases and stuff like that.
Actually, that's something that we should probably also point out as we're going along, is what your comments on the yarn overs at the start, and what they look like now, and what they'll eventually look like when you block
That's
them.
the thing. I'm so used to always knit the yarn over through the back loop, as, because if a yarn over is an increase, I just knit them through the back loop, and I kind of started doing that, and after a while I was like, it doesn't say knit through the back loop on the pattern. And I was just very surprised, because I was like, oh, that's going to make a hole in the edges. And then that's when kind of bringing back to aggressively blocking yarn. It's like, I think when I block it and we kind of really pull the yarn, the holes that we kind of see right now are just going to completely disappear. And actually that is giving us more room.
There's much more stretch at the edge.
For a stretch.
And it also plays into the fact that there is going to be a little bit more laciness coming forward as well. So having open yarn overs gives you a nice big opening. Now, there are a bunch of questions I've got here, just comments anyway. Shannon's like, yay, going to use markers. Yes, for markers. Marcy, oh, there's no mindfulness in my household when knitting. I suddenly find I'm fighting off cats. Sorry about that. Hello from Canada. You'd like to know if mohair can be light and airy like a wrap kimono inspired long cardigan wrap. In Crochet Solomon's Not Knit Love. It could, yes. I'm not sure what you're asking. Mohair, brush mohair is, particularly if it's a lace weight, can be knit really loosely. So you can totally make it extremely loose. And that's what that's why the effect we're trying to get here is you're using a larger needle because it's a lace weight yarn, and we're using a 4mm needle that's going to be blocked open. So that is the end effect we're going to get. If you're not using mohair and if you're using a lace weight, it's even going to be more exaggerated because your lace weight will have loose stitches. So when it's blocked, it's going to have almost a translucent quality because those parts will be the little wedges where you'll be able to see right through them. And that's going to kind of carry on through some of the other clues as well as we go through. So you do want those stitches looser is what you're kind of looking for. Cecily was asking, can you add short rows after clue 1 to increase the width at this point? Absolutely. So the way I would kind of view it is, you've done, the pattern has got 3 short row wedges. So if you wanted to make it a little wider and you've got, make sure you have extra of the main color, you can go add another short row wedge, another section of garter stitch, and as many garter stitch rows as you need to reach that 10, the multiple of 10 for the next section of the pattern, and the rest of it should all work fine. But that will nicely add it, extra width. What you can also do is actually make even each of the short row wedges a little wider, put a few more short row turns. Will also do it if you just want it a little wider and you don't want a whole extra wedge, just a few more rows are going to do the same thing as well. Shannon was saying her first mistake, perhaps it will help someone. After knitting the first main color rows, then do one more row. You miss that part and started on the wrong side of the work, not the side with the yarn overside. Very, very good. Yeah, there's a few ones where there's like work rows
an
again.
extra garter row one. Yeah, I got there. I feel that. And also I think that brings us back to just being very close to the pattern.
Yeah,
very close.
And it is the tricky part when we're doing mystery knit-alongs is you don't have a photograph to go by, so that the directions become like super important, more so than they would normally, because every row is what's kind of leading you through. Now, if you do want, I should say as well, if you want spoilers, come take a look in the photo thread in the in our Knit Hub. Anyone who's taking part of it, just keep the photos in there. So if somebody does want to keep it a surprise, then they're all in the one thread. So it's a nice, easy way to actually to be able to jump in if you want to, or to avoid photographs if you don't want to. But if you're going to get stuck, the photos may be helpful along the way. Liz was saying what she did was place the marker 3 it's after, and then twist and turn so that you had to knit to the marker and not turn and counting. Yeah, that's a great way of doing it, Liz, because that way you're not worried about figuring out where it is with the mohair, which it does get tricky, and particularly if you don't have great lighting or it's in the evening. I found that those mohair double stitches, they just got lost. So like markers really are almost essential. Marcy, as a combination knitter, is there anything you should be aware of? I don't think so. Like most of the techniques in this are going to be pretty much the same. Like yarn overs are going to be the same regardless. The German short row, again, is going to be the same thing, because most of it happens by how you turn. Because I don't, like you knit both ways. Can you think of anything that might throw oh, sorry, I just realized I heard continental, but she said combination. But I'll leave you with,
So you said combination, and I don't know what a combination
knitter is. If you are using it doesn't really matter which hand you hold the yarn in, but you do a standard knit stitch, but the purl stitches are wrapped the wrong way. So the kind of things where you probably are going to have to start watching out is, like, for the knit stitches, I assume you need to remount those to make sure it's not twisted when you're knitting two together. But at this stage, because everything is knit and there's no purls, I'm guessing that there's probably not a huge issue coming up so far. But so basically, nothing different from what you're probably going to usually encounter is my guess. Just looking through here. Yep, I think most people are all saying that they popped in a marker for after the German short rows. That's the biggest one. And the other one is because there's yarn overs on the start and the end, and there's only decreases on one side, it's very, very easy to end up one or two stitch counts off, right?
That happened so much.
Yeah.
And I find, because I rarely knit in all garters, that I had to mark my right side.
That's really important.
Yeah. And also because it's the dark yarn, I was just reading the knit as easily as I might have in other projects. So like I got caught having to redo it because I was one stitch short and I just couldn't see. Usually I can see where it happened.
Yeah.
Whereas this time I had to be really like, I found myself counting and like speaking to myself out loud, being like, this is the right side, you yarn over on this side and you knit until the last three, and just tried to, I made it a little mantra for myself. So, because it usually takes me not too long to kind of get into the rhythm and the cruise control. Like it's just kind of just cruising through. Whereas this time I really had to be again very mindful.
I do have a few cheats for this, but Magali is much more careful because she's working at a sample knit. So you're much more careful than when people are knitting for themselves. There's a couple of little cheats. First one that I found myself doing a lot is counting my garter rows, so to see how many I was doing. So it's like, how many should I have? And you kind of count up the garter rows. And then if there's one off, you can add, adding in an extra yarn over or not doing a decrease. Like you don't want to do it too often, but like if I know the rows were right, but that I had a decrease, one stitch too many, I might do an extra decrease or I might do an extra yarn.
Okay, so I might have done this once.
Yeah. and the thing is with garter, it's fine because I mitigated it by counting the rows. So that way I could see how many rows am I supposed to have. If my stitch count wasn't exactly matching up with the number of rows, I know I forgot something somewhere along the way, and it's not going to be visible.
Yeah, I would be actually interested in knowing like what people are using to count their rows, because I just go full like tally mark, like pen and paper, kind of old school. But I was asked because I know that some people kind of like to get like row counters and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you use
I end up being a tally counter for most of the time. The only time that's not the case is garter. I just count the bumps going up. But basically if it's anything more complex, I will just end up writing it down. Anyone who's doing a PDF, you've probably encountered Knit Companion. It's very, very useful. So that again, Knit Companion is a great one if you're a PDF chart reader, or in this case just pattern reader, because you can keep track of a lot of stuff on there. But I tend to print everything out. We've got Shannon is pen and paper. Nothing beats pen and paper.
No, it really doesn't. And also I really like that I think we have a lot of people from North America here, but based on the countries, we all do tally marks differently. So you can look it up actually, and I love it. We all. So I do tally marks in a little square. And then I bar the square, so that's multiple of 5. I know some people do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. I know that in Japan they do it differently as well. So
really interesting. There you go. You got a little bit of cultural insight today. We're going to start wrapping it up. I think I'm looking through here, and I think we've answered most of the questions. If any do come up going forward, pop them into the chat here, pop them over in KnitHub. You are more than welcome to jump in. If you're listening in and you're like, you want to get started on Grianchloch, pattern is called Grianchloch shawl pattern. The pattern will get you into the knit along. We'll give you the videos. You can use stash yarn. You can use the kits we've got. You can go to a local yarn shop. It's pretty much up to you. We'll be here next Thursday, same time again, Clue 2. So come join us. You can, again, we'll put it up during the start of the week, so you can just click notify me. But if you subscribe to our channel, you'll also get a notification. Well, thank you for joining us this week. And yeah, it's been a pleasure chatting with you all. Bye.
Bye.